if what you're saying is true, and I think it is, that we're headed for this cooling, it's going to be the growing areas are going to be closer to the equator. The food production in Brazil, places like Colombia and Central America are going to be more important because the food growing areas, the big grain growing areas in the northern countries is going to be shut down. And so if Russia and China are moving into that and also into Africa, I talked the week before last to an African analyst at the Hudson Institute, and she told me about how Russia and China were moving in, and it's not, again, it's the same kind of deal. It's a kind of very quiet imperialism where they infiltrate local political groups, they win over elites, and they use their agent networks, and they use a scissor strategy where they have two sides fighting against each other, and they end up pushing. They got the biggest American military base that we built. I think it's in Mali, if I'm remembering what she said right. And she said they played this game and they got us kicked out of that base. There's a junta there now, and then they're doing the same thing to the French bases. And who's moving in? It's the Russian mercenary group that Prigozhin had led. It's the Belt and Road Initiative, the Chinese, as you say. The Chinese have been immigrating into Africa. If you talk to Africans down there, they'll talk about the Chinese workers being People's Liberation Army reservists who can put on uniforms, and you're talking about hundreds of thousands of Chinese troops actually able to be mobilized in the sub-Saharan African countries. This kind of shocked me when I heard it. I heard this 4 years ago from an African from Cameroon, and he said in the neighboring country, he has a friend, and he says there's Chinese soldiers all over the country. You never hear this in our news or our media, but the Chinese do not have a history of charity, of doing things for other countries. You know, they don't have a Peace Corps. The Chinese are not building roads and power stations and schools and infrastructure throughout sub-Saharan Africa for the Africans. Right now, the Africans might use it, but I got a feeling they've got their own plans. The Chinese do. What do you think?
Ransom?
Yeah, I was thinking this, we talk about this a lot, that if you had the idea of cooling, then you would have to come up with some kind of plan to remove the military age men from the equatorial zones. And in the past 10 or 15 years, that's exactly what we've seen with mass migration, both from Africa and the Middle East, but also over here in the Americas, from Central America. And now what's happening is we're actually taking that serious. And if we were planning to use those places as food zones, like you can move over to China. China has a lot of people, most of them men, so they can afford to distribute troops all over the world, not only to reduce their own population, but to make sure that they have sway, like Jeff was talking about in Africa. They're building infrastructure. They're not doing it for free. They plan on moving in there, and we've seen this like all across the globe. Investments are moving to the equatorial zones, the large investments. They're building smart cities. But then you have to go back to like what you guys were talking about earlier, is these massive hordes of people moving around trying to get stuff. They've kind of manufactured that in a way that's not, a bunch of guys with weapons running around, but people moving to get benefits from countries that are now failing, like in Europe. They don't have the resources to give out, yet the people have been moved there. So now in those areas that we're having combat zones, and I've talked a lot about here in the Americas that I predicted we would have a combat zone along the southern border out of necessity, because we're removing the powers in Mexico and South, which are cartels, which are heavily invested into the food markets, avocados, all of the stuff that gets shipped here. The cartels want a piece of that. So we have to get rid of them at the same time as move in with investments. And that's kind of why I was pointing out the Panama Canal. We have to have that, because as China expands, they're going to be expanding in the South Pacific in order to make sure that they have those grow zones south of them occupied by their forces, by their treaties, and by their infrastructure that they're investing in. And unfortunately, the U.S. has only been trying to be the policeman of the world because we seem to be, or at least we have been seeming to be facilitating this plan to relocate massive populations of military age men out of their home countries. So then when northern powers, I guess you could say, move in there, there's really no one to argue it. There's no one to fight any kind of new tyrannies or treaties that are established. And if you've been looking at the news, there's been, not only has Trump designated the southern border a military zone now officially, but like I was telling you, Devine, they're building up troops all along the border. And I'm not talking about border patrol. I'm talking about military assets, artillery. And I even predicted that the cartel would start using Ukraine style drone warfare, which we've seen. They've been attacking, not only using it for surveillance, but literally attacking people with little bombs attached to it. The whole world, you see the same pattern. They're moving migrations, they're moving investments, and it all leads to this idea of a colder Earth. And then you have people like Bill Gates and all these guys that are ready to take credit for it, despite probably having nothing to do with it. But because they've been pitching these global warming CO2 ideas for years, they're going to say, look, we sprayed these aerosols. Look, we did this. We saved you. So you'll have to keep listening to them. And back to this pandemic idea, I don't think they're done with that. I think that's one of the easiest ways to kind of soft kill portions of the population. And specifically what Jeff was talking about, the older people that have know-how, the people that know how to build infrastructure, fix infrastructure, and keep it maintained. That's what we've lost in the last, I'm going to say 10 years, just to stretch it back. We've lost a lot of that know-how. And now we're trying to redo the tariffs. And think about that. If we could get all of these equatorial countries under wraps with big tariffs, they'll be more than happy to make new deals to ship food here. And we're not going to be shipping food out. I don't think China's going to be shipping food to anywhere because they need it now. They're in a spot where they can afford to have a kinetic war and lose lots of men, and at home still have more of a stable thing going on in China if they can secure food imports.
I'll take Jeffrey, can I just jump in? And I want to say thank you, Tucson, for buying us 20 double espressos. Yeah, we're going to keep it rocking into the evening. Please throw us a couple questions there, Tucson. I'll be happy to answer them for you. And Jeffrey, continue on. I just want to give a shout out for the support. Thank you.
What Ransom just said about this movement of military-age men out of Africa and Latin America, boy, I did a major paper for the Center for Security Policy 5 years ago on the issue of the big migration that took place. Actually, it did it in 2018. Big migration that took place into Europe. How the Russian mafia, Russian intelligence service, the Assad regime in Syria, the Turkish mafia, these groups were the ones that moved more than 1 million people in 10, 11 years ago into Europe. They remember that big thing. And we got interviews with East European ministers. I think it was a Polish and a Romanian minister. We got a testimony of a Syrian general that this was Putin's doing. He wanted to move all these people in there. And what's happening now, and of course the cartels and the groups in Mexico and Central America that are moving people to the United States, it's been long known that the cartels are working with the Russian intelligence and Russian mafia. Russian mafia really is an extension of Russian intelligence. And of course, the Chinese triads are down there in Mexico too. There's a guy named Scott Gulbranson who wrote a book called The Silent Invasion more than 20 years ago about Russian and Chinese and Cuban infiltration into Mexico. And some of his witnesses were killed. But it's funny you mentioned that, because now, of course, Lee Wheelbarger has developed this system for tracking what the Russians are doing militarily. And he told me, and he showed his audience, Russians are flying in young men of military age from South America and Africa to Minsk into Belarus, and they've got all these satellite training camps. And he says they're graduating 10,000 a week from these training camps. And these are not Russians. These are people from Africa and Latin America, and they're forming military units in Belarus. They're building this gigantic army out of these guys there. And so that just adds to what you're saying about military age men coming into Europe. They're coming into Russia as well. They're coming into the United States. They emptied the jails in the Congo to send them to the United States. This is exactly what you're talking about. And it's kind of shocking. I should mention Wheelbarger's work. The Russians are building a tremendous force in Belarus right now, in Belarus. 400,000 men is what Wheelbarger estimates. In addition to the army of Belarus, they are setting up what appears to be to invade NATO, certainly the Baltic states, working with Lee's material. A colleague of mine, Johnny Anderson, found an SS-27 17 kilometers from the border of Poland. And what's interesting is we found the bunker for the two companions of that unit. You do not deploy, this is an ICBM that could hit Antarctica from Russia. You don't deploy that 17 kilometers from a border unless you're planning a low-velocity surprise attack against, well, what would it be? The French nuclear deterrent. Remember, Macron has been threatening Russia with his nuclear weapons, saying, you don't encroach on Europe or I'm going to unleash on you, because they don't trust the Americans to defend them anymore. It almost seems like the world is going crazy here. And these things you're describing, these little nuances, they're very intriguing. And it makes you wonder how much the different governments know. And of course, they can't tell. You got 8 billion people. You can't publicly let it be known that people, that 6 billion, you got a game of musical chairs where 5 or 6 billion of those 8 billion are going to starve to death, right? You can't let that out. There'll be mayhem, right?
There are few things you can count on in a major disaster. Having your water supply cut off is one of them. With the Alexa Pure Emergency Water Bank, you'll have months of drinking water in your home. Everyone else will stand in line waiting to get just a few bottles. It's one of the easiest, most affordable ways to store emergency water, and it takes up hardly any space. The Alexa Pure Emergency Water Bank includes 1 BPA-free liner, comes with a siphon pump for extracting water, fits just about any bathtub, large or small, fills quickly in 30 minutes or less, holds up to 65 gallons of water, and keeps water fresh for up to 16 weeks, holds about 2 months of water for one person. A person can generally survive without water for about 3 days. However, the exact amount of time depends on many factors, including age, activity level, and overall health. Don't gamble with your life and well-being. Being prepared is easier than ever with Civilization Cycle and Alexa Pure.
Right.
Perhaps. And I got a blast right here. Also, BlackRock has just launched its ROC token, ROCK, on Ethereum blockchain, and that is trading up on Uniswap and CEX.io. So now we have something that's very much out. Now we have corporate stablecoin issuance that's going to be some of the largest on the planet to rival any government. So where does that sit with you in terms of like individual corporations that are involved in the funding and the pushing of this conflict that you're seeing? It seems that nobody wants it to stop. And whoever can control the food and control supply routes and the fuel going to those supply routes will dominate this planet. So what is it with BlackRock launching during the same time of all these tariffs, chooses until today to launch its new ROCK token on Ethereum as a stablecoin that is going to rival government treasury issuance across the planet as a stablecoin?
Yeah.
What are the chances of that? That's nearly impossible.
Yeah.
Unless it's a plan.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, I think that all these kind of plans are going to fail, whether it's real or not. And I'll explain to you why I think so. There was a famous economist and political scientist named Vilfredo Pareto. He lived about 100 years ago. He wrote a multi-volume work called The Mind and Society. And in that work, he explained what was wrong and what was going to happen to Western civilization. Now, taking what he said, look, he said something similar to what Mao Zedong said. Mao Zedong said power flows from the barrel of a gun. And all these people believe that power is money. And Mao, he called it the yin and way. He laughed at this. He said, all right, you have all the money and I'll have all the guns and stick them up. Now I have all the money and all the guns, right? You idiots who believe in money, you don't really understand. And so what Mao, and this book is called The Yin and Way. It's written by a Peruvian Marxist who spent a lot of time with Mao in the 1920s and 30s. And Mao told him, he said, look, I buddy up to the landlords here in Yunnan. I buddy up to the opium growers. I buddy up to the nastiest capitalists. And I'm really nice to them, and I don't take their money. I'm just gratuitously nice. Why? Because I'm nice to them. I help them get rich. And then it's like fattening cattle. They get fat, and then they think I'm their friend, and I just wipe them out. He said, so I'm their friend on Friday. They get rich on Saturday and Sunday, and on Monday I shoot them all. And he laughed. I mean, that was basically Mao's yin and way. And it was Stalin towards the end of his life. He said, you know, that Mao has something there. And the thing about the West, what Vilfredo said about the West, which is different from the East, different from the Russians and the Chinese. Pareto said that when a civilization or when a political system is young, it's very violent and it's led by lions. A lion will rip your head off. Well, it's a bloody mess, right? A lion will tear you apart. Look at Stalin. Stalin murdered a lot of people. Mao murdered a lot of people. Everything is born in blood when you have a new dispensation in an empire like Russia or China. The West, he said, is very old. He said that what happens when an elite, you start out with a warrior elite, because you look at Europe 400 or 500 years ago, it was aristocracy. And the aristocracy of the European peoples was a warrior aristocracy. That's what barons were. They were warlords. That's what dukes and earls and, you know, the kings, they were all just warlords. Well, what happened to them? Capitalism came in, and you had settled economic success. And he said, over time, what happens is, he said, there's two basic character types of human beings. There's basically two personality types, the lions and foxes. And he said, he quoted from Machiavelli on this. He said, those are the two basic people. Foxes are really sneaky, and they're all about negotiating and talking all the time. The lions are about fighting. Well, what happens is that as civilization progresses, the foxes become more numerous, and they look at the lions and they go, oh, this is bloody nonsense. These lions are crazy and they're stupid. We're going to get rid of the lions. We're going to do everything by negotiating, everything by money, everything by. So then Pareto points to the Roman Empire. What were they doing when the barbarians were invading them? They were trying to bribe the barbarians with money. Instead of having strong legions, they just decided to give them their money. And the barbarians said, oh, you're going to give us money not to invade? Keep giving us money. And then all of a sudden, they're going to invade you anyway to take your money. And so this is what we've done. We've bribed the barbarians. This is what Trump is suggesting, by the way, by saying he wants to invest in Russia. He's saying to the Russians, "Oh, we can invest, we can develop the Arctic together. We could put all this money and develop Russia really big time." This is one of his latest offerings to Putin. What is Trump? He's a billionaire. What is Putin? He's a colonel, a lieutenant colonel, right, in a paramilitary organization called the KGB. The whole militaristic structures in Russia and China are different than the democratic structures, more or less, in the West. And what Pareto pointed out is really democracy is plutocracy, right? It's ruled by the rich, plutocracy. That's what democracy is. The way that plutocracy rules is because you can buy votes, just like you bribe the barbarians. So the money people are the foxes. They predominate. We do not have lions anymore in the West. So what Pareto said is, like with the Roman Empire, the civilization of foxes gets devoured by the barbarians who are led by lions. And he said that's where our civilization is headed.